Teixeira, Pinto. Words now, Anna Teixeira, Pinto. Why 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 words now, Anna Teixeira, Pinto.
Hello. Welcome to the first edition of Why Words Now of 2024. A while ago we had Will Holder giving a talk here or making a performance, hence the mark on the wall, the Alice Notley tag. And Will made a magazine for many years called F.R. David, which is named after a Belgian singer-songwriter, or pop artist, who wrote a song called Words Don't Come Easy. When I started this program, one of the first people I thought of was Anna, and we've been talking about doing this for a long time now, a couple of years. And I thought so because it's always seemed to me that for Anna, words do come easy. They always come easy, there are lots of them, and you want to listen to it. So I'm very, very excited to be able to welcome Anna Teixeira Pinto.
Thank you, Simon. So thank you all for coming. I cannot see anyone because it's really dark and there's smoke in the room, but so I guess it's appropriate because this is a talk about ghosts. So ghosts, anthropologist Evans Pritchard argue that are not superstition but explanations. In her book Ghostly Matters, Haunting and the Sociological Imagination, Avery Gordon contends that a ghost is not simply a dead person, but a form by which something that was lost makes itself known or apparent to us, even if fleetingly or in a barely visible manner. Forces from the past and their shadowy manifestations control present life in more complicated ways than we tend to admit. A great many things, Gordon argues, haunt like a ghost, and by way of this haunting demand reparation, justice, or at least a response. The sighting of a ghost, thus, tends to expose the way the past makes cultural demands on us that we have difficulty fulfilling. That is, the sighting of a ghost tends to expose the entanglements of horror and history. In ghost stories, the house is typically the center of hauntings, and the phantom returns from the dead in order to reveal something hidden or forgotten, to right a wrong, or to deliver a warning that might otherwise have gone unheeded. The ghost, as Gordon puts it, is just a sign, or the empirical evidence, if you like, that tells you a haunting is taking place. Before we proceed, I would like just to briefly explain what haunting is not. Haunting is deeply embedded within the discourse of loss and mourning, and by extension, with the field of trauma studies as it emerged in the 1980s. To be traumatized, as Kathy Carrott notes, is to be, and I quote her, possessed by an image or event. To be possessed also describes the condition of being haunted. In other words, when we think of ghost stories, traditional ones at least, it is the haunting of the present by the past that emerges as their most common feature. The mode of expression that many scholars use to describe the spectral, Carrott argues, is similar to, if not fully consonant with, the terms used to describe the affective qualities of trauma. But, and here I'm paraphrasing Richard Croshaw, the reliance of certain branches of trauma studies on individual psychological and psychoanalytic definitions of experience may drive the field into an over-personification and subsequently distoricization of collective experience. Unlike traumatic repetition, the ghost provokes the one it haunts to a response or reaction, leading Avery Gordon to note that haunting, unlike trauma, is distinctive for producing a something to be done. The spectre, as Jacques Derrida would put it, is always both a revenant, meaning something that comes back, and arrivant, meaning something that comes forward, operating on a number of temporal planes that scramble the chronopolitical dimension of modernity. In contemporary theory, and here I'm quoting Maria Pilar Blanco and Esther Perrin, the editors of the Spectralities Reader, the ghostly and other forms of spectrality operate as a powerful metaphor for, and I quote them, encounters with disturbing forms of otherness, including the otherness contained inside the self, the home, and the homeland. The obfuscations inherent to capitalist commodity production, as outlined by Marx and Engels, and the ungraspable operations of newly discovered particles and technological processes, such as S-rays, the invention of penetrating yet intangible new media, such as telegraphy, photography, and cinema, which will also contribute to the revival of interest in the spectral. But the widespread obsession with proving or disproving the reality of spiritualism and related phenomena prevented the ghost figure potential from fully emancipating itself. In psychoanalysis too, the unconscious, and by extension the uncanny, could be thus construed as a rejection of animism, and of the backward, uncivilized subject and its primary narcissism, as described by Freud. And I just want to make like a side note here. If you look up like the Freudian description of the uncanny, what really becomes salient is like the, like Afrophobia that basically informs the entire theory. Psychoanalysis will demystify, and I quote Perrin and Pilar Blanco, hoping to convince us that everything that seems to be coming from the outside is really coming from this now shrunken inside. Though uncanny experiences persist as reminders of the unconscious animistic roots, where we are reminded that what lies between society and psyche is hardly an inert, empty space, we are bereft of the theoretical vocabulary that would allow us to narrate what that space is populated with. Because, as Avery Gordon also notes, Freud, and I quote her, is vexed by the possibility of conceiving the unconscious as the life of others and other things inside us. This brings me to Jack Albertson's suggestion that horror is always ahead of theory when it comes to understanding cultural categories. In a glossary of haunting, Heath Tuck and C. Ree juxtapose mainstream horror film, mostly made in the US, to Japanese film, to comment on the question of innocence and compromise, or lack thereof. In American horror, they write, the hero is always perfectly innocent. Haunting is undeserved, even random. Part of the horror of US horror films is the presumed injustice that a monster would tamper with the life of a decent person. The hero spends the length of the film righting wrongs, slaying the monster, burying the undead, performing an exorcism, all as a way of containment. By contrast, let's see if I can now escape this without freezing the computer again. Yes, I can. By contrast, in Dark Water, Hideo Nakata's 2002 Japanese horror film, a vengeful ghost, to quote Tuck and Ree, haunts a newly single mother and their daughter whose relationship the ghost covets and resents. At the end of the film, to spare her own daughter, the mother accepts the inevitability of the haunting and assumes the role of the ghost's mother. Her daughter, in turn, suffers the same maternal abandonment that triggered the first ghost's horrific fury. Rather than heroic slaying, there's an anti-heroic relinquishing. Rather than resolution, deferment. just gonna show the first clip.
建物自体はだいぶ古いですから。
今日はどなたが迎えに来てくれるんですか？
離婚なさったそうですね。そういう家庭の子供にはよくあることなので。
今日はお父さんが迎えに来てくれるって。ママは？
母親がこの子を置いて急に家を出て行っちゃった。ご存知ありませんか？2年前に女の子が行方不明になった事件。河合美津子ちゃん。
このぐらい水の底から。
But we could also argue that the underlying horror in this film is the female condition. And there's an interesting scene that we are not going to see now because this jumped and I don't know where it is anymore, in which the mother tries to argue and plead with the janitor because there's a mold stain that keeps reappearing in the apartment. But he brushes her off. Because of course, as a female, she doesn't yield the same authority that a male would yield. And also, the mold that keeps reappearing, it's kind of like a metaphor for this threat of precarity that a single mother trying to raise her child alone is constantly experiencing. The scene where the single mother tries and fails to get the janitor's attention would be thus like an allegory for the female condition. We could also venture to guess that the mother does not mistake her child for the ghost in the end of the film, but perhaps driven by an unconscious urge to escape the burdens of motherhood, follows the ghost, leaving her daughter, a real child, behind. Not all things that haunt like a ghost, however, demand reparations, justice, or at least a response. Some demand the burial of an unspeakable fact in an object designed to mislead the haunted subject. US film, in particular, is a repertoire of hauntings, often taking the form of displacement. In the aftermath of the Winter Soldier's investigation, sorry, this is now really messy because everything got scrambled. In the aftermath of the Winter Soldier's investigation, a film and adjacent media events organized by the Vietnam Veterans Against the War in 1971, so the Vietnam War lasted from 55 to 75, and the US was involved until 73. It became clear to every American family that that boy sitting in front of them at the dinner table, their beloved son, brother, cousin, was also a rapist and a mass murderer.
Kill anyone I could, knowing whether they were innocent or not, just to make sure I wouldn't get killed. And that was my philosophy. Like if I'd go into a village and have to kill 100 people just to make sure there was no one there to shoot me when I walked out, that's what I did.
I didn't feel that morally you shouldn't carry out some of these orders?
I felt whatever was in the best interest of my country was what was best, and that's how I was raised to believe.
I think that, what should be brought out is the horror of the everyday, the commonplace, what went on there.
What's happened is the American public's been lied to. The Army's come out.
They didn't care what you were doing or how you were getting it. They wanted bodies, and that's where civilians came in also.
I'm just here because it goes on, and somebody's got to do something. And here I am,
Go down Vietnam.
But they can't deny the testimony of all these dudes in the room.
We were about 5 miles down the road where there were some Vietnamese children at the gateway of the village, and they gave the old finger gesture, and it was just like response. The guys got up, including the lieutenants, and just blew all the kids away. That was my first day in Vietnam.
I'm not sure if you could understand, because I think the sound is a bit... can you understand what they're saying? Okay. So in the aftermath of the Winter Soldier, and in the aftermath also of the when the images of the My Lai massacre were published, it became apparent that the Vietnam War was targeting civilians in great numbers, and the result was, interestingly, an explosion of films about serial killers, like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, or the Zodiac Killer, which went hand in hand with the obsessive media coverage of real-life serial killers like Ted Bundy, who was constantly and disturbingly described as charismatic, highly intelligent, and handsome, an American golden boy, if you will.
There was mold on the cheese and the lunch meat, and I swear the stuff had been in there at least a month.
God, what did you do?
I told her we were out of buns, and I went down to the supermarket and threw it all out.
Ever notice the cup she serves her coffee in? Ugh.
And the worst part of it is, the kids pick up the habits.
And that little Johnny is something else.
A real brat. Bobby, get down out of that tree. You'll break your neck. He won't mind.
I haven't found a boy that will.
Help me, Mommy, Mommy, help me. Oh, my God. Hold on, honey. We'll get you down. Oh,
can you reach
him? Him never to do that.
I'll get him. Hey, little fella, you got yourself stuck, huh?
Oh, my goodness. You all right? Oh.
Here, come on inside.
I hope he doesn't fall on that one footer here.
There we go. One. All right.
Oh, he's got him.
There we go. Safe and
You all
sound.
right? What do you say to the nice man? Say thank you.
I don't like him.
Bobby!
Do you work here in the park?
I just took the day off, enjoying the peace and quiet.
We come up here during the week because it's so quiet. Not so many people around,
Yeah, they sure aren't. You walk up here?
Oh, it's only 3 blocks, and, it's good for the leg muscles.
Well, maybe I'll run into you again.
That'll be nice.
We're here almost every day. Stop by and say hello.
Bye-bye now.
Bye. Now there's a gentleman, and handsome, too.
Joanne, you're a married woman.
So this is just one among many examples of the sexy serial killer that will then, create an entire genre. And, you're probably all familiar with Hannibal Lecter, the very sophisticated and erudite psychopath, and the crop of psychopaths that is seen as this kind of superior intellect, and basically completely above the average. The Gothic novel also plays a major role in making palpable how horror is always ahead of theory when it comes to understand cultural categories. As Jack Halberstam puts it, and I quote him, "The Gothic novel, in particular the late Victorian Gothic, provides a metaphor for these processes in the form of the monster. The monster is the product and the symbol of the transformation of identity into sexual identity. Gothic fiction is a technology of subjectivity, one which produces the deviant subjectivities opposite the normal, the healthy, and the pure. Gothic may be loosely defined as the rhetorical style and narrative structure designed to produce fear and desire within the reader. So how sexuality becomes the dominant mark of otherness, that is, the sexuality of the monster is always foreign and the sexuality of the foreign is always monstrous, is a question that we may begin to answer by deconstructing Victorian Gothic monsters and examining the constitutive features of the horror they represent. Where the foreign and the sexual merge with monstruosity in Gothic, a particular history of sexuality unfolds. It is indeed necessary to map out a relation between the monstrous sexuality of the foreigner and the foreign sexuality of the monster, because sexuality, Halberstam argues, is itself a beast created in 19th century literature. In order to read monsters as the embodiments of psychic horror, one must first of all subscribe to psychoanalysis' own tale of human subjectivity, a fiction intent upon rewriting the Gothic elements of human subjectivity. Psychoanalysis goticizes sexuality. That is to say, it creates a body haunted by a monstrous sexuality and forced into repressing its gothic secrets. Psychoanalysis, in the Freudian scenario, is a sexual science able to account for and perhaps cure gothic sexualities. Goticization in this formula, then, is the identification of bodies in terms of what they are not. A gothic other stabilizes sameness. A goticized body is one that disrupts the surface depth relationship between the body and the mind. It is the body that must be spoken, identified, or eliminated. In other words, the process by which that which haunts us becomes re-narrated as either psychology or entertainment transforms political material into sexual material. This also explains the goticization of race the Gothic novel so thoroughly achieves. The Gothic, as Alberston argues, marks a peculiarly modern preoccupation with boundaries and their collapse. Gothic monsters are the entities that stand at the fault line between self and other. And Gothic horror also tends to filter the concept of nature through the lens of haunting. Ghosts, one could say, are the way the Gothic worlds, and they appear not only at the center of engagements with nature, but also at the center of struggles structured around conceptualizations of race, class, and gender. In a spectrum that ranges from the spectral to the fungal, the Gothic ghost can either transcend matter or descend onto it, becoming nothing but mold. So here, just like to explain this briefly, we always tend to imagine like post-death state as a spectral state, where we appear like this kind of intangible ghosts that still remained, still maintain the characteristics of identity and subjectivity that we had, as living entities. And we are just there as observers looking at the world without being able to engage with it or to interfere in it. But the other way, Gothic horror can manifest or can make the spectral entities apparent is not as, entity that rises above matter and exists in this formal or in this purely formal state, but as an entity that descends onto matter and becomes just mold, completely devoid of individuality and of any sense of psychology. In this style of haunting, the post-death state, rather than spectral and ethereal, conflates post-death with ante-life and becomes entirable, tangible matter. In this post-death realm, as Keatley argues, we may persist not as ethereal ghosts, but as matter we do not yet understand. This fungal weird figures its character's deaths and what follows as a material state, specifically as a spreading fungus, like in Dark Water, a mycelial haunting. But as Keatley goes on to argue, and I quote, "Black mold signals not only a metaphysical blackness, but a political, explicitly racial darkness which threatens to subsume majority white populations. We find this particular racialized anxiety in one of the most influential environmentalist books of the 1960s, Paul Ehrlich's best-selling The Population Bomb. In his preface, Ehrlich details how he came to understand the population explosion, emotionally, as he put it, when on a family vacation to Delhi. He describes driving in a taxi through, and I quote him, a crowded slum where the streets seemed alive with people. People thrusting their hands through the taxi window, begging, people, people, people. Ehrlich's description of this scene, brown hands thrust through a taxi window, reads like the plot of a zombie movie. And Ehrlich explains that, frankly frightened, he feels that this scene had a hellish aspect. This hellish feel of overpopulation, as Keatley notes, is one in which white people are crowded by dark masses, Fictions about black mold demonstrate a strong narrative continuity with zombie figures, figures that are halfway between the animal and the fungal, decomposing flesh devoid of subjectivity. The zombie is therefore always already a mass, a swarm. Sorry. I'm really sorry for all of this technical mishaps. If the fungal weird expresses anxiety about extinction, in the zombie movie these anxieties are even more overtly racialized. And this is like just a clip from World War Z. Uh-oh. Perfect.
If I could get into India, where would I start? Who would I speak with?
India is a black hole. Forget about patient zero.
I can't do that. It's too late for me to build a wall. I'm running out of time. I need specifics. I need answers.
I don't have answers. All you can do is find a way to hide.
It's too loud. It's too loud.
Coming over the top!
Command, we have a breach at Salvation Gate. They're coming over the wall.
So mold. The Gothic representations of monstruosity in Bram Stoker's Dracula and Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde also show how monstruosity is mobilized to connote anxieties about alien via its embellishment with racialized inscriptions of difference in order to strengthen colonial categories of self and other. Bram Stoker's Dracula, in particular, deals with liminal entities, boundary disputes, and attendant panic. In Dracula, as Christoph Kraft notes, Stoker borrows from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde a narrative strategy characterized by a predictable, if variable, triple written. Each of these texts first invites or admits a monster, then entertains and is entertained by monstruosity for some extended duration, until, in its closing pages, expels or repudiates the monster and all the disruption that he, she, or it brings. The conversion of human into inhuman forms is here entwined with inversion, a term that connotes sexual deviancy. Barry G. Gold reads the novel in terms of inversion of energetic flows, but I would like to add the second meaning to suggest that Dracula is also pointing to an equivalence between the inversion of economic flows and the inversion of gender roles. The very term, sexual inversions, appears in Victorian age as a term put forth by writers such as John Addington Symonds and Havelock Ellis, but was immediately, and Edward Carpenter. Distinctively apologetic, these texts tentatively tried to argue, with considerable circumspection, against the usage of the term sodomy, which was at the time the most commonly used term to refer to homosexual desire. But as Kraft sustains, while pleading, and I quote him, For the cultural acceptance of desire and behavior hitherto categorized as sin, these writers unwittingly reify the gender norms of the Victorian age by implying that male desire for another male is a feminine desire which somehow inhabits a male body. Desire, and I quote Kraft, according to this explanation, is always already constituted under the regime of gender. To want a male cannot be a feminine desire, cannot not be a feminine desire, and vice versa. The body, having become an unreliable signifier, ceases to represent adequately the invisible truth of desire, which itself never deviates from respectable heterosexuality. In Dracula, the question of inversion will play out on multiple registers, from the anatomical inversion of protuberance and orifice, the mouth, or better put, the vampire fangs replacing the penis as that which has the capacity to penetrate, to the inversion of desire and agency. Female desires behave accordingly to male gender norms and shed their passive roles. Or the already mentioned inversion of the colonial of the colonial order. Dracula, a creature of the Orient, feeds on the blood of the British citizenry. That is, the periphery is extracting from the imperial center rather than the center plundering the periphery. Dracula is also a novel about financial transactions and imperial hegemony, or the struggle over market expansion. The novel begins with Dracula summoning Jonathan Harker, a British solicitor, to his dominion in the Borgo Pass, under the pretext of a real estate transaction. The British lust after Eastern riches, whilst the Count lusts after British blood. The novel, one could say, is predicated on a transactional matrix, in which the fluid flow of blood is converted into financial flows of capital. But Dracula is also a novel about class struggle, in which immortality, the immortality of the vampire, is tied to inheritance, that is, to the structure of the capitalist economy. The undead's assets, already accumulated and living on immortally, trivialize the efforts of the living, who must work for their paychecks. Dracula messes with the direction in which energy is supposed to flow, from young to old, from east to west, switching it to the other way around, and in the process, leaving British gentlemen fraught with geopolitical and sexual difficulties. The female vampire, much like Dracula, is also messing with the direction and nature of fluid flows. She feeds on children rather than nursing them with her breast's milk. She lusts after men's blood, not after their semen. Her vampire teeth, those phallic signifiers, allow her to puncture, that is to penetrate, her male victims, rather than be penetrated by men. German media theorist Friedrich Kittler once observed that the slaying of Lucy in Bram Stoker's Dracula was a literary account of a gang rape. In the deep of the night, the men sneak into her crib and drive a stake through her heart, after which Lucy is beheaded, a form of symbolic castration. Against the backdrop of an empire under vampiric siege, her murder is portrayed as self-defense. As Kittler goes on to argue, Dracula is also a novel about the mobilization of modern technologies and bureaucratic efficiency against all that is asynchronous or resistance to the pace of Western modernizing energies. The arcane powers of the East are no match for typewriters and phonographs, the recording devices that democratize the gathering, storing, and distribution of information, whose retrieval would make possible to seek and destroy the blood-sucking Count. Stoker's Dracula, Kittler writes, and I quote him, is no vampire novel, but rather the written account of our bureaucratization. Anyone is free to call this a horror novel as well. Dracula, I would add, is also a novel about resignifying the entirety of the social and sexual semantic field under the regime of efficiency, about turning insolvent desires for sexual gratification into solvent desires for administrative proficiency, about turning erotic waste into office work. Mina, the other female protagonist, tethered by her work ethics, escapes unscathed. She clutches her typewriter like a life jacket, and by making herself pliable to male authority, avoids the violent fate that befalls her friend Lucy. The office displaces the boudoir as the site where a new type of femininity can flourish. Returning to class argument on gender, I would suggest the same holds true for coloniality. In Dracula, all desire, however mobile, is fixed within an heterosexual mask, and the sexualization of women is figured as a deformation. All economic flows, as well, however mobile, are fixed within an imperial frame in the same matter that any conversion that runs counter to the colonial norm is figured as an unnatural inversion, and in the end, both heterosexual norms and British supremacy are left intact. I'm going to jump to the end because otherwise we would take way too long. And I would just finish by saying that the Gothic novel is obsessed with economies of meaning. The monster itself is an economic form in that it condenses various racial and sexual threats to the nation, to capitalism, and to the bourgeoisie in one body. If the Gothic novel produces an easy answer to the question of what threatens national security and prosperity, the monster, the Gothic monster represents many answers to the question of who must be removed from the community at large. To return to where I began by way of a conclusion, the way of the ghost is haunting, as Ivory Gordon says, and haunting is a very particular way of knowing. Those who haunt our dominant institutions and their systems of value are haunted too by things they sometimes have names for and sometimes do not. Horror, rather than theory, can embody this way of knowing and thus provide a better tool to understand the cultural categories that haunt our societies and their public spheres to the present day. Thank you, and again, I'm sorry for all the technical mishaps. Happy to answer your questions, especially because there were some glitches and maybe some parts were not very clear. We don't do questions, we just go for drinks? We never do questions? Okay, then we just go for drinks. Zombies. Zombies that express a very specific... oh, can we please not? That express a very particular anxiety about like demographic explosion in racialized terms, because of course like this fear of demographic explosion is all, you know, like, and of course World War Z is a very good allegory for that, because you know, it's all about building walls, right? So as Trump says, build a wall, keep them all out, and of course like this depersonalization and de-individualization of like the underclass as some sort of swarm, which we also hear abundantly in political discourse these days. You know, the swarms that are threatening to overpower Europe. Drinks then?